Hi, my name is Richard Azerga from Microsoft, and over the past few months I've had the opportunity to travel the world and talk with lots of developers about building applications with Office 365. Now, one of the sessions I've enjoyed presenting the most on is building apps with Bootstrap and Angular. The reason I've really enjoyed this session is that it really speaks to the new Microsoft, how we're really embracing open source technologies and really trying to deliver a developer experience to whatever technology that you might like to build applications with. So both Bootstrap and Angular are wildly popular frameworks out there, and we want to be able to show you that you can build applications with those or any other open source technology that you like to use. The challenge I've found is that traditional SharePoint or Office developers are brand new to a lot of this. So they may have used a little bit of Bootstrap, but probably not any Angular. And one of the reasons for that is traditionally we've shoehorned our developers into using very specific technologies. So for SharePoint, you had to use web forms and .NET, and you might be able to use a little bit of jQuery, a little bit of Bootstrap, but it was pretty challenging to do much with that. And so it's a whole new world with Microsoft, and we're really embracing the developer and what tools that you might like to use as a developer. So in looking at that challenge of the traditional SharePoint or Office developer being new to these technologies, I found that it can be very overwhelming to pick up something like AngularJS, because if you look at Angular, there's so many different things you can do with it, and again, it can be kind of overwhelming to try to take it all in at once. And so what I've found is a really popular way and successful way to introduce these technologies is to just start from scratch. Let's just start from a completely blank page, and let's take small baby steps at building it up to have more and more functionality and introduce small concepts along the way so that by the end we have a fully functioning app. And we can do that in a pretty quick amount of time, because what's great is that both Bootstrap and Angular, one of their biggest powers is the ability for me to build great applications very fast. I don't have to do near as much to be able to deliver a traditional application. And so that's what I'm going to do in this video. Is we're going to start from a blank slate, and we're going to try to build up a fully functioning SharePoint app by the end that leverages both Bootstrap and Angular. So this is kind of an introduction, kind of an introductory course for a SharePoint or Office developer, really anyone that might be new to Bootstrap or AngularJS. And because those technologies are open source, I'm actually going to do most of my building in kind of an open source tool. I'm going to actually do things in a browser using a tool called Plunker. So this is just a website. You can go to Plunker, and it allows you to develop client-side things just in the browser and be able to see an update in real time as you're building it. And I find it's a great tool to quickly build things in front of developers and have them be able to see what different things do along the way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to first concentrate maybe for the first 10 minutes on Bootstrap and see how Bootstrap can be used to build really good looking web content quickly. And then we'll kind of light it up with Angular after that. So let me go ahead and launch into my editor here, and we'll get started. So just to give you a little bit of lay of the land of Plunker, what you're going to see is on the left I have my different files. So by default it's going to give me an HTML page, a JavaScript page, and a style sheet that I can work with. Over on the middle I have actually my editing window. This is where I have all my HTML that I can work with, or if I have a script file I can come in here and edit my script in this little editor window. And then on the far right side, I have basically a library of different open source things that I can reference. So if I wanted to reference Angular or Bootstrap, I can really quickly add those to my little Plunker project. The other thing that the right side has is I can go and actually see a live view of what your site looks like. So you can see it says Hello Plunker. If I were to change this to say Hello World, you can see that it basically updates in near real time. So it's a great way. I found it's very efficient at building things live and in real time. So the first thing we're going to do is let's reference Bootstrap and start kind of looking at some of the core functionality around Bootstrap. So I'm going to go to my libraries here, and Bootstrap is one of my options. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and reference it. And what this did is, if you look in my HTML, it actually added a style sheet and a script library. And that's exactly what Bootstrap, what I would expect. So Bootstrap combines both a script library and a style sheet to help me build really good looking websites quickly. And so as I did that, it immediately started even leveraging things like a nice looking font. At the very least, already my hello world is looking a little bit nicer. Now, one of the things that Bootstrap is really popular, one of the main reasons it's gotten so popular, is that it is a great framework for building responsive web content. So as I resize, to different size devices, my web content can automatically adjust accordingly. And the way Bootstrap does this is a couple of ways. One is it specifies by default some page widths. So it has 4 specified widths that are popular with different size devices. So there might be an extra small width that's common for like a mobile device, maybe a small that's kind of the next size up, a medium, and then maybe even a large sized width that is popular with things like maybe a PC or a Mac type of screen, a full-sized computer. And so it builds all of that inside of a container. So the first thing I'm going to do here in my body is I'm going to put a div, and we're going to give it a class of container. Now there are 2 types of containers, and I want to illustrate that in a really simple way. Is I'm going to tell our container that it's going to have a background of red. And I'll go ahead and put our little header in here inside of that container. So we're going to put everything inside of a container, and here you can see we have our red header here that says hello world. Now this is the default container, and the default container in Bootstrap is set to use those fixed widths. So what you'll notice is as I expand my screen here, it keeps that container at a fixed width. So you can see here, I have some white space on each side of the container. And that's because it's set at a fixed width. Now I could go see what those widths are. They're all really well defined on the Bootstrap site. In fact, we'll go out to the Bootstrap site here in just a bit. But those are things that if I wanted to, I could even tweak those. Now they've already done a lot of work to figure out what are some of the popular width devices that are out there. And so I don't find that I ever really tweak with those much, but the idea is that this kind of default container is going to use those fixed widths. So actually, if I were to expand this a little bit more, you can see how it popped out a little bit wider. So what just happened there is I went from one sized width to a bigger sized width screen. So if I were to go back in again, right there, it popped back in. So that is kind of the concept of the first type of container, is a static width that's going to be centered in the middle of my page. The other type of container that I can use is what's called a fluid container. And all I have to do is add fluid to my class. And as soon as I do that, you notice now my page is always going to be edge to edge. It's going to use the full width of my page. So regardless of how wide I resize this or how small I resize this, it's always edge to edge. So that's the difference of the 2 types of containers that Bootstrap gives me, is the regular container, which is fixed width centered, or I can go with the fluid container. So the next kind of concept, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my red background. That was really just to illustrate the 2 types of containers. The next concept is the grid system that Bootstrap gives me. So Bootstrap is built on a 12-column grid system, and I can specify different elements within that grid system, and it can automatically adjust for me again as things resized to different sized devices. And to really set up that grid system, what I want to do is set up some rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 2 rows inside of my page. So I have, first of all, I'm going to have this first one, and we give it a class of row. And we'll do this for both of these 2 rows. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a header as 1 row, and then my second row is going to have maybe some side navigation and maybe some body content. And so let me just move up my header up here. And the next thing that I need to do is specify the columns that each row is going to have in it. So for this first row, the header is, what I'm going to do is I'll say div, and I'm going to give it a class of, we'll do a column, and we'll do extra small of 12. And what that's basically saying is, when I say extra small, is I want this to use all 12 columns, even if I'm all the way down at an extra small width screen, so an extra small type of device. For my second one, my second row, what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify 2 columns. So we'll do 2 columns here. The first one, I'm going to give it a column, I'm going to say small instead of extra small, and I'm going to give it 3. I'm going to give it 3 of our columns. So we get 12, and I'm going to use 3 of those. And I'm just going to say some navigation is going to go in here. And then the second one, if you do the math, if the first one used 12, the second one, or the first one used 3, the second one, it's going to use whatever's left over. In this case, 9. I don't have to do it that way, but in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just use up all 12 of my columns. And I'm going to just, for now, put some just generic text in here just to illustrate a few things. So I'm going to put maybe 4 paragraphs of just some random content. Okay, and so what I want to show you here is why I picked small as my column size for the navigation and the body content. So actually, if you look at my rendering over here, it's using the small width. If I were to resize this a little bit smaller to where it hits the extra small, so I'm now in extra small, it stacked those 2 columns that I had inside that row. And so if I had specified these as extra small, what you'll see is it will always put them as side by side. But what I want to do is I want it to automatically adjust once I get smaller than the small sized width. And so that's how you can see it stacked those here. So that's how you can start doing really nice responsive things with some of the Bootstrap components. Now, I need a navigation, and one of the great things is Bootstrap has some great looking components that I can automatically use inside my page. And so what I'm going to do is go out to the Bootstrap site here, and we can find all of those different things that I can leverage. So one of the things I'll go is in the navigation here on getbootstrap.com is go under components. And one of the first things I'll point out here is that Bootstrap has a lot of really good icons that are built out of the box. I find these really cool because what you might find is, as a developer, is you have to constantly go and get a designer to give you a different colored icon. These are just using fonts, and so there's lots and lots of different icons I can use in my app, and I can simply just change the color and just using styling. So if I wanted to come back over here and maybe in our header, I'll just put a little quick span, and in this span I'm going to give it that class. And as soon as I do that, what you'll see is now I have headphones up by Hello World. And I'm going to put an additional space here so it's spaced out a little bit more. And so you can see really quickly I'm able to do that. And if I wanted to change the color of the headphones, I can simply go over here to style, and I could say maybe color equals red. And you can see just by changing the color, it changes that icon color, which is really nice. So I never have to go to a designer to give me another colored image. The other cool thing is that I can add to this is maybe I don't want to show the icon when it gets to a certain size. So I can actually hide things based upon those 4 widths that Bootstrap defines. So I could actually just come in here and say hidden dash extra small. And now what will happen is once I go to an extra small width, not only will our navigation and body stack, but our icon should go away. So let's actually see if this works. We'll drop down to extra small, and there we go. And so now you can see that the nav is stacked on top of the body, and we got rid of our icon. And if I were to go back, you can see it brings back the icon and puts things side by side. So it just shows you how cool we can do different things with Bootstrap. Now I needed some navigation. So if I go back to my Bootstrap site, the Get Bootstrap site, there's lots of different components I can use. So I'm going to go to navs, and I can find all kinds of different navigations I might want to use within my page. And so here's one that I kind of like. It's these pills. And so I'll just go ahead and copy these. And we'll go back to Plunker, and I'll just replace this navigation element with pills. Now these don't look really great because they're actually meant to be kind of across the top. Now if we go back to the Bootstrap site, you can see another thing I can do is just tell it to be stacked. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the pills, and I'm going to say nav-stacked. And now they should look a lot nicer. So our site's starting to come together here. In fact, if I were to resize this again, you can see it stacks the pills. And you can see how this could look really nice now on like a smaller mobile type of device. The next thing I'm going to do is let's introduce maybe an image. That's another thing that Bootstrap does really well is works with images. So I'm going to put an image out here. And we need to get an image. So let's just go out and search. Let's search for maybe rainy day. It's a rainy day here in Dallas. And so let's find a rainy day picture. So I'm just going to go to Bing Images, and we're just going to find just a random rainy picture. And so here's one right here. And so I'm just going to grab the URL of this, and we're simply going to use it back in our Bootstrap site. So I'm going to go ahead and set that as the source. And the first thing you're going to notice is that now it's gigantic in our web content. In fact, if you notice that I have all these scroll bars, it really didn't size well. So Bootstrap even makes things like images really easily. So what I'm going to do is simply add a class to it called image responsive. So I'm just do img-responsive. And just by doing that, you can see that now it fits nicely within our page. In fact, if I were to resize this now, if I were to just bring this in smaller, what you can see is that it'll even like resize it really dynamically as I get a lot smaller. It works really nicely with that kind of responsive feel. So Bootstrap and images are really fantastic. It does a great job. So the app that we're going to build is an artist catalog. It's for music. And so our little icon that we did is going to work nicely with it. Now, before I kind of put together that artist catalog, one of the complaints that I hear from people that are relatively new to Bootstrap is all Bootstrap sites look the same. The colors and everything, you can usually tell when something's been built by Bootstrap. Well, I would say that if you just use the out-of-the-box theming and styles, that's true, but you have full control over those styles. So I can override styles. I can. There's places where you can go and build your own version of Bootstrap. You can kind of generate things on the fly. But there's also a number of great themes. There's hundreds and hundreds of free themes that you can go leverage in your site if you wanted to make it look different. So I'm going to go to one site here called Bootswatch, and this is just a site that has a bunch of different themes for Bootstrap. So if you scroll down here in Bootswatch, you can see all these different types of themes that you can leverage within your site. So, maybe I like this slate one. So I'll go and click on the slate theme, and I can simply just grab a reference to the CSS here. So I'm just going to copy the link address. And if I go back to Plunker, I'm going to go and just reference this as a secondary style in my page. So now that I've done that, you can see that our site looks completely different by referencing that. Different fonts, different colors, and in some cases it could really do much more advanced things with the different styling. And all the same responsive things work. So as I do things like resize the site, you can see that it's still all the responsiveness still works. So now that we're starting to kind of put things together, let's build our kind of the UI for our artist library. So what I'm going to do first is change the title of this to artist library, or we'll call it music artist. And I'm really going to use a different kind of layout for this. I wanted to illustrate how to do kind of the grid system, but we're going to have a pretty simple layout for ours. So I'm going to get rid of most of the HTML that we've already written. And what we're going to do is maybe just put a single row that's going to also be 12. So we're just going to have things kind of stacked regardless of what size screen or device that someone's using. And what I want to do first is we're going to have a table of all of our different artists. And tables are another area that Bootstrap does a really great job of styling. I could spend days making a good looking table, and Bootstrap's going to make it incredibly easy for us to do that. So what I'm going to do is add a couple of classes here. So I'm going to give it a class of table striped, so that I have striped rows, and then I'm going to do another one called table hover, so that as I hover over the rows, it gives me a nice little kind of user interface feedback. And then so the next thing I want to do is let's put a table row and put some headers in here. So I'm going to maybe do three table headers. So let's do th times 3. And the first one is going to be the artist name. Then we'll do genre. And then we'll do rating. And then I can start building maybe some rows of data. So let's just do a tr. And inside of here, we'll put maybe three columns. So we'll do a td times 3. And for the first artist, let's just go with maybe, we'll do group love, and we'll call them alternative. And we'll give them a rating of a 4. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this a few times, and we'll just change some of the values out in here. So we'll do maybe 3 columns. And so you can see now with the hover and how nice it made a really good looking table without me having to do a lot of work. So again, Bootstrap really accelerates at how I can make good looking tables and good looking elements. So let's go ahead and give it just some different, we'll make the second one the Beatles. And we'll call Beatles rock, and got to give the Beatles a 5. And then finally, let's do maybe the Cure. We'll call them new wave, and we'll give them a rating of a 4 as well. All right, so we start having kind of our user interface here. The other thing that Bootstrap does that is really cool is it builds really nice looking forms. So I'm going to create maybe a really simple little, if I wanted to search my artists, I'm going to create just a really quick form maybe for me to do some searching. And I'm going to call this one is a form group. And inside of here, I'm going to put an input that's a text field. So you can see our text field, and you can see a default text field does not look very nice in an HTML form. And again, I could spend probably a full day making a good looking text box, but Bootstrap's going to make that really, really easy for us. So I'm simply going to come in here and I'm going to give it a class of form control. And really, I can add form control to almost any HTML control to make it look really nice. In fact, if you look, it did nice rounded corners. And in fact, if I put my cursor in here, it even kind of makes it glow. And I didn't have to do anything special. That's just something that Bootstrap automatically does. And so just a few more things we'll do in here. Let me give this an ID of maybe search. And let's give it placeholder text. So placeholder is search artists. Okay, so we have our kind of user interface put together here. It looks great, but it's obviously very hard-coded. So everything that we've done so far has been very hard-coded. And that's where we're going to now maybe switch gears and introduce Angular to make this more dynamic and be able to add some functionality to this. So we're going to start really kind of lighting this up and being able to do some really cool creative things with it. So in order for me to leverage Angular, I need to add a reference to that inside of our project. So I'm going to come back over to my library, and at the very top here is Angular. So I'm just going to click on Angular, and it adds a reference to Angular in the head of our HTML page. And so I can come back here. Nothing's going to look any different because really all we've done is referenced Angular. We're not using it yet. In order for me to use Angular, Angular is a true framework that we use with JavaScript. So it's a client-side framework that we're going to use. And one of the reasons we call it a true framework is Angular has its own directives, both attribute directives and element directives. And you might say, well, what in the world is a directive? So a directive is just that. It is an attribute or an element in HTML. So the very first thing that I need to do is, if this page is going to use Angular, is I need to mark it as an Angular app. And the way I do that is in the head of my document, I can simply say ng-app. And just by doing that, I've told this page that it is going to be an Angular app. Now, to really follow good HTML5 standards, I want to, any sort of custom attribute, I really should prefix with data. So I'm going to prefix all of my Angular directives with data. So you can see I did a data-ng app. So Angular is going to allow us to build a really powerful, what we call single-paged application. So the idea with this is we're going to have a single page that we're going to be able to dynamically bring in different views based upon what the user does. And Angular is also, it's really good at doing that single page application. And it's also really good at doing things like data binding. And so just to give you an example of that data binding here, we already have a search box. I'm going to add another Angular attribute to this called data-ng model. And basically I'm defining it as something that's a part of our model. Angular uses kind of an MVC type of approach. So if you've ever done anything with MVC before, you'll find Angular to be very familiar from that standpoint. So I'm going to go ahead and just call this my search. Now I can reference that really anywhere in my page just by leveraging that name in brackets. So I'm just going to put a header here, and inside of brackets I'm going to type in search. Now watch what happens in my user interface over here as I type in my search box. So I could say hello world, and you can see as I'm typing it's immediately displaying where I've referenced that model in my user interface, in those brackets. So that's something that Angular is automatically done by me marking this page as an app and by marking that input field as a search. And so I can do really cool things with it from that standpoint. So that's how you can see we can start binding and making things a little bit more dynamic. And so let's take this a step further and actually start defining some of our different things like a controller that we can start building a very interactive page. So in order for us to do this, we're actually going to start building some things inside of our script page. We're going to start, we don't want to put all our script in this page. Let's actually pull that off into a separate script file. So I'm going to go over to my script file here, and I'm going to define an app. And the way we do that is I'm going to define an app, and I'm going to have it be equal to a Angular.module. And inside of this, I can define a name for our app, and we'll just call this our music app. And then I can define any sort of dependencies that this app might need. Now, when I say dependencies, Angular is going to make very good use of what we call dependency injection. So if there are different objects that Angular has that I might want to be able to leverage, I just mark it as a dependency, and Angular will instantiate that for me and send it into my app so that I can use it. That may not make a whole lot of sense now, but you'll see later on how we can very easily start referencing other things and be able to add it as a dependency so that we can easily use it. The next thing that I'm going to do is define a controller that our app is going to use. So I'm going to, again, MVC or Angular uses kind of an MVC model. So we're going to define a controller that's going to control kind of the logic of our page thus far. So we're going to say app.controller, and we can just give it a controller name. In this case, we'll call it music controller. And then again, I can define any sort of dependency it has. And I'm actually going to define a dependency here called scope. And the best way that I could describe scope is similar in .NET or JavaScript as using the keyword this. So whenever I use this inside of JavaScript, that gives me kind of context for where I'm at. And that's kind of similar to what scope is providing me. It's kind of passing in as a dependency this. It gives me context for where I'm at. And so what I want to do is first here on this app, this controller, I want to define my data and make it a little bit more dynamic. Because right now, if we go back to our HTML, we've really hard-coded all of these artists. It's all very hard-coded, and we want to make that more dynamic. And so I'm going to first, it's still going to be kind of hard-coded, but it'll at least be data that we can bind to our user interface, is I'm going to define an array on the scope. So I'm going to say scope.data, and I'm going to make it equal to an array. And this array is just going to have, it's going to define all of our artists. So we might say name equals group love. We might say genre equals alternative. And finally, rating is equal 4. And so what we're going to be able to do is define our data here just as, you know, a normal array of objects. So I'll just copy a few more here and we'll kind of fix it up. So the second one was the Beatles, which was rock with a rating of 5. And then finally it was the Cure, and that was new wave with a rating of 4. And so now that I've defined this in our controller, we can go back and make a few slight modifications to our page to make it more dynamic. So the first thing I'm going to do is, since we have a specific app name here, we want to make sure that our where we've referenced at the top of our page, where we have our ng app, we're going to say ng app equals our music app, right? Because we want it to be using that module and not a different one. The other one is I want to use my controller somewhere in this page, and so I want to define somewhere where it uses that controller, and I'm going to just put it at the body. I could really put it at any scope I wanted to, but just here in the body, I'm going to do data again, because that's our safe way of doing this with HTML5, and I'm going to say ng controller, and I'm going to make it equal to our music controller, because that's what we named our controller back in our script file. Now that this controller is in scope, I can leverage anything on the controller, whether it be data or if I had some sort of function that we've defined on the controller. So if I had an add artist function on the controller, we could very easily leverage that here. So just to show you kind of how we can make this more dynamic with that controller is I can use an additional attribute that Angular gives us, which is a repeat. So what I'm going to do here is on our rows of data that we've hard-coded, I'm going to actually remove all but one row. And then I want to repeat this row for what we have in scope with our controller. So I'm going to use the data-ng repeat directive. And what I can do in here is I can say, it's basically like a for each loop. So I can say every item in data, because we've defined something called data. So you can see it's already repeated that row 3 times because that's how many rows we actually defined in our data attribute that we have here in our data, our property that we've defined within our controller. In fact, if I were to add another row here, you can see it immediately adds a 4th row to our table because of that ng repeat. So I'll just add a 4th row here. We'll call this Alt-J, and we'll give it a music of alternative. Okay, going back to our file now, I don't want to repeat these static properties. So I've group love, alternative, rating of 4. We're repeating that 4 times. What we want to do is repeat the actual data for each of these items. Now, just like I referenced the search when we were using that earlier, I can simply reference anything in double brackets here. So what I can do is just say item.name. And you can see now it repeats the correct artist for each row. And the same thing here, I can simply in double brackets for genre, I can say item.genre. Or if I wanted to do rating, I can simply put that in double brackets and I can say item.rating. And you can see now it's showing the real data that we have defined back inside of our controller. So the ng repeat is a great way for me to do really cool data binding using Angular. Now, one of the cool things is I can combine these with all kinds of different filters. So maybe I wanted to make everything uppercase. I could easily come in here and add you know, a filter to uppercase everything. The other thing I could do is filter by different things. So I could simply do a filter by search. And now as I come in here and start typing in search, because search is already defined in this scope, it's defined as a model that we have, it'll automatically apply that as I start typing. So if I wanted to look at all the alternative artists, I can simply just start typing and you can see that it filters down the items in the repeat. So the filters are a great way for me to work with our repeating elements. So with our ng repeat here, we can apply different types of filters. In this case, I'm doing a data filter based upon another text box that we have that's defined as a model. All right, fantastic. So I mentioned that Angular being a kind of a single page application framework, and the concept between that single page is I can make different views kind of come in and out based upon different logic. And so far we're doing everything as kind of one static view. So the next thing that we're going to introduce is the concept of having different views and different controllers that use those views based upon how we want the logic of this application to work. In order to use this, in order to use different views, we're going to need to introduce an additional reference in script reference in the head of our document called Angular routing. And so if I go back to my library, you can see that there's a separate library here for Angular route. And so I'm going to go ahead and add it to our page here. So you can see I added that Angular route. And this is just separated out because, you know, sometimes people might build something just with Angular and they don't want the overhead of the routing component. But if we're going to do a true kind of advanced application that has dynamic views, we want to use this concept of routing. And what routing is going to be, it's very similar again to normal like MVC and .NET. So when you set up MVC, you set up kind of the routes that based upon the URL paths, you're going to use different controllers and different views based upon what that URL looks like. And that's the exact same thing we're gonna do here. Is now that we have a reference to routing, we're gonna set up routes that our app is gonna be aware of, so that based upon what the URL looks like, we can dynamically load different views using different controllers. So just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like, we're gonna go back to our script file here, and what we can do is basically we can start configuring the routes on our app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say app.config, and here's where we're going to configure these routes. So this is done as a function, and it's going to take a dependency called a route provider. So we're going to have a route provider that we're going to use. So we're going to define everything within here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this route provider to define all of the different routes that we're expecting. So I can say route provider.when, and then I can define the path that I'm expecting. So let's say the default path is maybe just /items, right? And that might be, or artists. And then what I can say is when the path is equal to that, I can define both the controller that it uses and the view that it uses. So I'm going to say template URL, and it's going to equal something, and then I can define the controller that it's going to use as well. And so what I can do is I can define a number of these wins. For every one of my routes, I can define a different controller and a different view that's used. And then what I can also do is specify what we call an otherwise. So if somehow we get to some weird path, we can maybe redirect to something. So I'm going to do an otherwise here. And I'm going to say otherwise we're going to redirect to. So I'll use the redirect to. And we're just going to redirect back to items. So far we basically have defined 3 paths and then a default that says, hey, if it doesn't match any of these, go back to items. So let's say maybe the first one is gonna just list all of our artists. So we're gonna let's create one called the list controller, and it's gonna maybe load up view-list.html. And then maybe the next one is items/add, and if it's that, then let's maybe use the and actually I have these a little bit backwards. I have my view listed where I should have my controller, so we'll just fix that here really quick. So the next one will maybe do a view-detail. So it's going to use a detail view, and the controller it's going to use is the add or add controller. And then finally, we want an edit. So for an edit, edit's going to be a little bit more dynamic. So in this case, what we're going to specify is maybe an ID or an index that we're going to pass into this, so that we can know which item it's actually trying to edit. So in this case, I'm going to pass the index in, and what the cool thing is we can still use the same view as add. So edit and add are going to use the exact same kind of form, but the difference is we're going to use a different controller with it. So I'm going to have it use the edit controller. So let me just clean this up. I'm just going to use a little function that Plunker has to clean up my code. So you can see root provider, when it's items, use the view, the regular list view, and use the list controller. If it's item/add, we're going to use the detail view with the add controller. And if we're passing an actual index in, that means we want to use the edit controller on the same detail view. If it doesn't match any of these paths, we're going to redirect back to items. Now, when I say paths, what we're going to find here is that Angular will automatically, we're going to be able to go to different locations, but it's going to be still on the same page. It's just going to pass it as like an internal link on the page. So there will be a pound in front of it in the URL. And the cool thing about this routing is if you've ever been on a site before that is single page, and you might go through a bunch of different screens and then you click the backspace or click back in your browser and you lost everything that you just did, that's a single paged application done wrong. Angular is going to make it very easy for us to kind of keep a breadcrumb trail of where the user's gone. So if I click back in my browser, it'll go back to the previous dynamic view. Even though my page is never changing, I'm never going to a different page, we're just dynamically loading different views. Angular's routing is going to handle all of that for me, so I never lose all of my work, right? So it does a really good job of keeping track of that, and we'll take a look at exactly what that looks like once we get this put together a little bit more. Okay, so we have our routes defined, and what we need to do next is actually get the right controllers set up. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm not using this music controller anymore. We'll just rename that to the list controller. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pass an additional dependency into my controllers that are going to help me maybe move from view to view. So, and what that is I'm going to use something called a route param. Actually, I'm going to use one called location that's going to help me move around. And then I'll also use another one called route param. So route params and location. And basically these are, again, dependencies that I'm asking for. Location's going to help me redirect to a different view. And then route params are going to help me read maybe what sort of dynamic properties are being added when I go from page to page. So if I want to read that index so I know which item's being edited, I will have that. So I'm going to go ahead and add these to our function as well. So we have location and we have route params. And I'm just going to copy this and create our additional two controllers here really quickly. So, and we'll call this second one the add controller. And then finally, the last one we're going to add is the edit controller. There we go. So we have all our controllers. I'm going to clean things up again. So now there's one thing. You notice that our page is broken currently. There's a few reasons why it's broken, but one is I'm using routing, but I haven't told my app, I haven't injected the dependency to tell my app that it can use routing. And so I'm going to add that as an additional dependency up here in these brackets. And the dependency I'm going to do is what's called ng-route. So there, now that I've done that, you notice that my page isn't broken, but we're also not getting any data. And the reason we're not getting any data is because we've, well, a few reasons. One is we don't have a music controller anymore. We've renamed that. The second reason is we don't have a view for it. So let me create a few views because we have these dynamic views that we've defined. So let me go ahead and just create these as HTML files. So we'll do view-list.html. And we'll go back to our script file. And then let's also do view-detail.html. We'll just create these as new files. All right, so now what I want to do is this table that we have of basically all of our artists that we're repeating, that's actually something that I want to make as a dynamic view now. So I'm going to actually remove this from my page. I'm removing all of that. And I'm going to replace it with a single div that I'm going to give another attribute called data-ng-view. So this is basically what I'm saying is this is where I want in my page to load up a dynamic view. based upon what the path is, what the user has done. This is exactly where I want that view to be. The other thing is I'm no longer going to hard code my controller. So you can see I have a hard coded controller here, and that's going to be dictated now by our routing. Routing is going to handle both the controller and the view that we use on all of our different pages. So if we go back to our script, the default view should be the list view, right? Because you can see here's this otherwise. If nothing matches, then we're going to redirect the user to the items view. So let's build that list view here really quickly. I'm going to paste all that script that I kind of ripped out, and you can see now our app is starting to work again, right? Because it's dynamically loading all of that. Now, what I want to do is add a couple of, let's just add a button here to our form, or our list form called maybe add artist. So I'm just going to add a quick button, and we'll call this add artist. And I'm going to define a function, and the way we do this is instead of an onClick, we're going to do a ng click. So it's going to use one of the Angular directives. So I'm going to say data-ng click, and let's call add artist. So it's going to be a function. We're going to need to define that function. Now let's make our button look a little bit better. So let's give it some Bootstrap classes of button primary, and maybe, actually that's probably good enough. So right now the button doesn't do anything. If you see me clicking it, it doesn't do anything. And that's because I need to define this function, this add artist function. And you can probably guess where I might want to add that. Where's our data defined right now, right? Our data is defined in a controller. So that's where we're going to go put it, is on that same controller. So here's our list controller where our data is defined. So what I'm going to do is define a function on that scope. So I'm going to say scope, and then we'll say add artist, and it's going to be equal to a function that we can define here. So for now, what I'll do is I'll just put maybe an alert. So we'll say alert, the click worked. And so now if I were to click on add artist, you can see I get that alert. It's saying the click worked. So that's where we're going to put our functionality. And really what we want to do is when they click on add artist, we want to take them to the add. And if you look, we've already defined that route is item/add. So what I'm going to simply do is, the reason we injected this location dependency on this controller is that's what allows us to change the page, go from page to page. So it's similar, since we're in JavaScript here, it's like doing window.location. I can do the same thing here. So I'm simply going to say, let's do a location.path. And we're going to set it equal to items/add. And so now if I were to click on add, you can see it takes us to another form. Now we haven't built this form yet, but you can see how it took us to that other page. So let's go ahead and build our detail page. So just to save a little bit of time, kind of the one place I am going to cheat here is in building a nice looking add form. So I've already done that ahead of time, and I'm simply going to paste that in. So if you look, here's our add form. If I click add, you can see I have artist name, artist genre, and then I have a rating that I can give them. And I have a save and cancel button. So if you look, we've actually, on those buttons, we've already defined a save and a cancel. So I just need to define those in their respective controllers. Now, the cool thing is that this view is going to actually be used by two different controllers, both an add controller and an edit controller. So let's go and work with that. So if I go back to my script, here's my add and edit controller. What we need to define on here is both a save and a cancel. So I'll simply come over here and say scope.add, and that's going to be a function. And then we'll do the same thing of scope dot cancel. And actually I did that wrong. It should be save. So we have a save and cancel. And actually both of these are going to take us back to the item. So now one thing for save, we need to do save the new item as a to-do. So we're going to do that here in just a moment. But after we've created that new item, we're going to redirect back to the main view. And cancel is just going to redirect back to the main view. We're not going to save anything. They're saying we don't want to do anything anymore. And so let me just copy this because both the add and the edit controller are going to have that identical logic. So I'll just come in here and we'll paste in the save. Now the save here isn't going to save the new item. It's going to save the existing item. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works now. I'll go ahead and say add artist. It brings us to our form. If I click save, it brings us back. Same thing with add and cancel. It brings us back. Now the other thing we need to do is when a user clicks on a row, we want to go to the edit. We want to go to that same detail view, but we want to pass the actual item into it. And so for me to do that, again, it's pretty easy. I'm just going to come to our list view. And on the row itself, I'm going to define an ng-click. So I'm going to say data-ng-click. And what we're going to do is let's call edit item. And inside of this, we can actually reference the index or actually anything on the item itself. If we wanted to pass the name into it, I could simply do item.name. But in this case, we're going to just pass the index in that we're using for each row. That way we can just reference it very easily. So back inside of our code, we'll go ahead and go back to here. We need to define a function that is edit item. So we're back on, again, our list controller, because that's where that ng-click is. We'll say scope dot edit item, and that's going to be a function that's going to pass in the index, right? So we'll just put index in here. And so what I can simply do, or it really didn't need to be index, it could be anything, it could just be X in this case. What we're going to do is we're going to redirect this time, instead of to add, we're going to redirect to items and then pass in the actual index that's there. So you can see I'm basically, this one's a little bit more dynamic. When they click on the rows, we're going to pass in an actual row index so that we can reference it easily when we first come in here. So now if I click on this, nothing is still displaying because I actually need to pull out that index that we passed and actually look it up and be able to bind the item. The cool thing is our form that I created, it already excuse me, it already references the ng model of item.name, item.genre, and item.rating. So I just need to define item on our edit controller. So let's go back to our script. So here's our edit controller. And what we need to do is we need to define our scope.item. And now that item is going to be referenced as our data that we have. Now here introduces a big problem. So far we've defined the data only within the list controller. It's not available to the other controllers. So this is going to introduce the final important concept in Angular that we're going to leverage, and that is a factory, where we can define basically our own service. So a factory defines a service that we can use across all of these different controllers. And the way I define this is again on our app. So I'm going to simply say app.factory, and in this I can define the name of our service. In this case, I'm going to say music service. And then I can define, again, if I need various dependencies on this, in this case, I'm going to reference something called root scope. So I mentioned scope earlier is kind of like this. So for this music service, we want scope, but we actually kind of want scope for whatever's using it. So that's what when I say root scope, I'm actually in a way saying I want scope of whatever controller is using this service, because this service, again, this music service is going to be available across all of our different controllers. And then other than that, it's defined kind of in a similar way. So we're going to say, again, root scope. Okay. Now, this is going to use kind of a singleton pattern. So what I want to do is maybe define the service. So we'll just say SVC equals brackets, and then I want to return it at the end. So we'll do a return of SVC. Now I can start defining anything I want on this service. So for instance, what I really want to do is I want to define my data on the service. So I'm moving it from my controller. I moved the data from my list controller to my factory, to that service, that music service. So you can see here I have all that data defined. And now what I could do is maybe even go so far, actually what I could do is maybe make this a private variable. So I could say var data, and now I could maybe define a couple of functions on this service. So maybe service.get artists. I could maybe say service.add artists. And I could maybe define a service.edit artist. Now the add artist probably needs to pass in a new artist. So we'll say new artist. And then my edit as well will probably pass in an artist. So we'll kind of make those the same. So now I've basically broken our app temporarily. What I need to do is I need to reference my service. I mentioned that the whole purpose of creating this app.factory by defining this service is I want to be able to use it in all my controllers. And I'm going to do it as a dependency. So we've used some of the Angular out-of-the-box dependencies. Here we're going to add a dependency to our own service. So I'm going to add music service to basically all of our different controllers that we have. So now that music service is going to be available for all of them to leverage so that they can look up the data and that they can maybe interact with it. So let's first do the list service. So we had something called data, and what I'm simply going to do is say music service.get artists. So you can see now that I've done that, and is that what I called it? Oh, I'm not actually returning anything here. So what I want to do is inside of here, let's do a return of data. And now you can see it's bringing back that data. So we're starting to kind of get things a little bit better. Now the cool thing is I can actually start referencing things very easily. So if I wanted to maybe for scope.items, for the edit, what I can simply say is music service.get artists. And now I want to reference it by the index of it, right? Because that's what we're passing in here. So what I'm going to do in order to reference this is I'm going to say parse int, because it's going to basically bring it back as a string. But I'm going to use this other dependency that I put called route params. And I'm going to say route params.index. And the reason I'm saying index is because that's what it's named in our route, right? If you look up here, I've defined it in our route as index. Now I don't have to call it that. I could call it foo if I wanted to. As long as I reference it the same way, it really doesn't matter what I call it. So I could come back here and say route params.foo. So let's see if it worked now. We should be able to click on a row and it should be able to reference the data for that specific artist. So let's go ahead and click on maybe The Cure, or actually let's do the Beatles. And you can see that sure enough, the Beatles, rock is the genre, and then artist rating, and I might have something wrong with artist rating there, but you can see how it was easily able to reference those items. And now it's just a matter of actually working and actually saving things here. So let's maybe implement our add artist. So I can say cancel. The cool thing is now my data is available to me across all of my controllers by leveraging that service. So let's do an add. So on this add controller, what we're going to do is implement our add. And we're going to simply call the music service, and we're going to pass in a new artist based upon what was entered in there. So we'll say music service dot add artist, and inside of here we will basically reference a new artist. So we'll reference its name, we'll reference its genre, and we'll reference its rating. And the way we're going to reference those are by the actual model in the view. So if I come back to the view, you can see there's a model defined for each of these called item.model or ng model. We have item.name, item.genre, and item.rating. That's all I need to do in my code here is reference those in a similar way. So I can simply come over here and say scope, say scope.item.name. We can say scope.item.genre and scope.item.rating. Okay, so now we're basically passing an item into the add of our service, and we can just basically add it to the data. So I'm just going to come up here and in the add we'll say data dash or dot push. So that's basically pushing a new item into our array, and we can say artists or artist, the artist that was passed in, and we should be good to go. So let's give this a shot and see if everything works. So I'm going to say add artist. We'll give it a new artist name of maybe Foster the People. We'll give it an artist genre of alternative, and we'll give them a rating of like a 3. And let's click save. And something is amiss in our add here. Let me see, maybe I don't need scope. Oh, actually I did need scope, but I had it wrong. We need to put a $sign in front of it. So let's try that again. Let's do an add. Let's say Foster the People. Genre of alternative. Rating of a 3. Click save. And now you can see it added it as a new row and basically went back to our original view. So we've never left the page. In fact, if I click back here, you can see it brings me back to the form, and if I click back again, it brings me to our form here. So we've never left the page. We're just dynamically loading different views into the page. So hopefully you could see how this starts coming together really quickly using this kind of way of building stuff. So let's do the edit, and then we'll kind of transition into SharePoint. I'm going to change one more thing on the edit, which is I'm going to pass in the index and the artist when I go and I save this. So I'm going to actually just take the exact same row here and put it in our edit controller. The only difference is I'm going to first pass in the index. So I'll say the same. I'll use the same thing where we're looking at the route params, and we'll pass that in so we know which element is being edited. So we'll know that index. And what am I missing here? Oh, I need to get rid of one bracket. There we go. Now what I can do in my edit is I can simply come up here and say data, and reference it by the index, and we can ultimately replace the artist if we wanted to. So I could just reference the artist. So let's see if that works now. So let's maybe edit group love, and we'll change it to maybe group loves with a couple of exclamation points. And I'll click save, and you can see that we were able to update that item by doing a reference this way. So we have a pretty dynamic form here that we've put together. And the cool thing is that for us to now make this dynamic with real data that SharePoint might have, it's just a matter of modifying our service. That's the only thing that we're really going to have to modify. Is I'm going to come in and basically replace the function that gets artist by maybe doing a REST call to get data. Add artist, again, will be a REST call where I go and do a post, and then I can do a merge to actually edit a row that I might have in SharePoint. So pretty much everything that we've done is going to be identical, except for our music service that is basically our way of working with data across all of our different controllers. We're going to make some modifications so that instead of working with this hard-coded data, we're actually going to work with SharePoint as our service that our data is coming from. So in order to do that, we'll come out here to SharePoint, and we're going to create, I'm just going to create a SharePoint hosted app. So I'm going to come over here to apps for SharePoint, and we'll call this the music catalog. And a few of the things that I'll do here is I'm going to create this as a SharePoint hosted app. That's going to make it really easy for me to connect into SharePoint because it's basically residing within SharePoint. So I'm just going to log into my tenant. And we'll basically do a couple of things here in order to kind of set some of the plumbing in place. Is we're going to use SharePoint lists for the artist and maybe even the genres. So we want the genres to be maybe a little bit more dynamic. So I could simply come out here and let's maybe add a new SharePoint list. So I'm going to add item, and I'm going to add a list for, there we go, at the very top. We'll call this genres or genre. And I'm just going to use a normal custom list for this, and we'll just make all the genres the title. So I'll just say finish. And then I could even, inside of my declaration of this list, define by default all of the kind of default values we might have. So in my list instance, I could come out here to the XML, and I could actually define maybe some data for this list where I could come through and define all the different rows for each one of my fields. So I could say row, and then we could define a field, name is title, and put a value in here. So the first one maybe is alternative. So we could really easily do the genre inside of here. The second thing that we're going to want to do to kind of get this set up is create a list for our artists. So I'm going to again come up here and say add new item, and we'll call this artists. And we'll again do it based on a custom list. And here we'll add a couple of different columns. We'll maybe add a genre. And I could select different data types, but in this case it's really just storing some text, so I'm just going to call it single line of text. And then maybe we'll go with rating here. So we'll do a rating, and maybe that's a number. So we could really do anything we wanted to with that. So now that I have that in place, we need to turn our attention to our form. By default, a SharePoint hosted app is going to want to leverage the master page of SharePoint. So you can see that here, it's leveraging the default.master. And that's actually, it's fine if we want things to look like SharePoint, but we've kind of looked at all the great kind of things that Bootstrap can do for us. And And if we use the SharePoint's out-of-the-box master page for our app, we're not going to be able to have that really, or not easily be able to have that really nice responsive feel that Bootstrap gives us. And so one of the things that we're going to do is we can ultimately not leverage that page. We can not inherit from that normal web part page, or at least not the master page file, and we can just have our own blank HTML page. So let me jump over to more of a completed version to show you what I mean. So let me go to our default page here, and you can see that there's not much going on. This is the actual page that's getting deployed as a module into SharePoint, and there is really no reference to anything SharePoint related in here. It is just a pure HTML page, and I'll make this a little bit bigger. You can see that I am referencing things like jQuery, Bootstrap, and our Angular libraries. And we also have our Bootstrap theme CSS that we're leveraging. But really, other than that, everything else is kind of a pure HTML page. Those are just our references. There's no reference to anything else that is specific to SharePoint. In here, you can start seeing some of the exact same things that we did before. So we have our ng app defined as the artist app, and we have our ng view that basically says, here's where I want to load the dynamic view inside of our page. This is where all the views are going to get toggled in and out based upon what the artist does, or what the user does. So again, you can see how this is almost identical to the page that we had here inside of Plunker. So very, very similar between these two pages. In fact, I think I even simplified it a little bit more inside of SharePoint in our ng views. Now our views are here again inside of this SharePoint app. So we have our list view. Again, it looks just like what we have been looking at before. So I'm basically doing my ng repeat, and we have our quick to go and look at the artist details so that we can edit the artist. And then I'm just referencing each item within that list. And then we have our add button to add a new artist. If I go to the detail, again, it's the exact same thing. I did a few additional things in here to make it a little bit prettier. So the drop down list for rating, it uses stars. So you can see I have little stars here. In fact, one of the other things that I did, and this is maybe getting a little bit more advanced, but you can download the solution and see it yourself, is I've even defined my own directive. So Angular has its own directives. We've mainly worked with attribute directives, but you can also define your own attribute directives or element directives. So if I go to my list view, one of the things that you see here that looks a little bit interesting is a star rating. Now you could probably look at that and really quickly, if you've worked with HTML, you know there is no HTML element called a star rating. And that's because I've defined my own star rating. And so that's defined in kind of two ways. One is there's an HTML page that says, hey, anytime you see that element, use this. But then there's also a little bit of script that wires that all up. And I'll show you what this looks like, and it's a really great way for us to again reuse some things using Angular. And actually this makes our HTML look a lot more readable. If you look at this, anyone could look at this and say, hey, star rating. I bet it's going to show, a star-based rating for that artist. So be able, defining your own directives. We looked at things like Angular's attribute directives like ng click and ng repeat. But this star rating, it's my own directive. It's an element directive. And it's a really nice way of cleaning up your code. So you can see really nice to define it that way. Okay, so let's, where we left off in Plunker was that we had basically everything functioning. The only thing we didn't have was truly dynamic data. Our data was hard-coded in our service. So if I were to come back over here to Plunker, you can see we have our music service that we've defined, but that data was completely hard-coded. Now we were able to add to it and edit it, but it wasn't coming from like a live data source. And so that's really what I wanted to highlight in here as we bring it to SharePoint, how we're going to kind of start wiring that up into SharePoint. Now, the most, I would say, tricky part about all of this is if you've looked at anything regarding REST with SharePoint, we have lots of documentation on how you make different types of REST calls with SharePoint. Doing a REST call that performs a GET is actually pretty straightforward. But when you do a post, if I wanted to add records or update records that are in a SharePoint list, that's where it gets a little bit more interesting. In order for me to perform that, I have to include what's called a request digest value. And just to illustrate kind of what all that means is let me actually go to a SharePoint site here really quickly. So let me go to my normal developer site on my Office 365 tenant. So we'll just go out here. It'll take me a second to log in. And what you're going to find is that, again, in order to perform a post against a REST service in SharePoint, I'm going to have to perform that using this value, this request digest that I'm going to have to include in my header. So here we go. Let's go ahead and log in. And that value, that request digest value, is managed by SharePoint's master page. So if I were to view source of this page here really quickly, I'll just do a quick search for digest. And here it is. Here's my request digest value. It's this really long string. And I have to include this in the header of all of my posts. So when I do a post to add a record or update a record, this needs to be included in the header. Now that's fine when I'm using SharePoint's master page because it's going to automatically put this on the page for me. However, if I'm not using SharePoint's master page like I have in this really simple HTML here, there's no master page being leveraged, I'm not going to have that available to me by default. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to actually, when I first load my app, I need to go out and get that request digest value. And luckily, we do provide in SharePoint an endpoint to get that. So I'll kind of show you here really quickly a script file that I might use to do that. So let me just quickly create a script file. So I'm going to add just a simple script file to this. And actually, let's go to my app here. So and I'm just going to add some lines here. Here is my Angular. Again, this is all exactly how we built it in Plunker. You can see I've defined my app. I've defined the configuration for all my routes. And I've defined what I call a SharePoint service here that I've put a couple of things on. Now one thing I've done on my service is I've put an additional dependency, and the dependency is this HTTP dependency. And what that is I've basically told Angular that as a dependency in this service, I want to be able to call out to do HTTP requests, do posts and GETs. And so I'm going to be able to use an Angular syntax to perform these REST HTTP operations. Whereas, typically I might use something like jQuery or something else to do that. Angular gives me the same types of capabilities. Now, one of the things I've found is that in all of my apps that I build with Angular, I find that there are 3 things that I put in almost every one of those. One is I'm always, if it's a SharePoint app, I need to be able to read out of the URL what my app web URL is and what my host web URL is. And in order for me to read HTML or parameters out of my URL, I need a simple function that can read parameters out of the URL. The second thing that I need is I need to actually go and read those values. So I need to read my app web URL and my host web URL. And that's going to help me perform all the different REST operations I might want. And then the third thing, so I have a function that gets URL parameters. I have the actual performing the request to get those parameters for app web and host web. And then the third thing is getting the request digest value for this page. And so I created a code snippet that I'm going to put on my blog that you can go get that will get that request digest or do all three of those things. So I'll go and add this here and just show you exactly what it does. So I'm just going to do a Control KX, which brings up my code snippets. And here you can see it's what I call the basic SharePoint Angular stuff. So when I click on this, you can see what it does, and it allows me to name my SharePoint service. So I'm going to do SHPT service. There we go. And so you've probably seen this before, get query parameter. So this is that first thing that I say I'm always doing is getting, creating a quick function that gets a query parameter. And then you can see I'm getting my app web and host web. So that's exactly what I'm doing here is I'm just using that get query string parameter to get the app web and host web off the URL. Then finally, I'm getting the form digest value. And the way I did it was I put it as an ensure form digest. So what I can do is I can just call into any of my SharePoint services here and I'll wrap it in this ensure form digest, which will make sure that I've gotten it. So what you can see here is, hey, if it's not null, then just return what the form digest value is. Otherwise, you need to go out and get the form digest value. And here's how I do that. I simply just make a call out with the app web to get context info requesting that form digest value. So this is basically, you perform a post, but you perform a post to this API endpoint and it will return the form digest value. So you can see that here is if it's successful, I'm going and basically specifying it. And then from then on, I'm only going to have to do this once because it's going to keep it live in this service that's shared across all of the different controllers. So I'm only getting that form digest value once. But the important thing is the entire reason I'm having to do this is because my page does not leverage SharePoint's master page. I want to use all the nice Bootstrap things, and therefore because it doesn't use the master page, I'm not automatically going to have this request digest value available to me. So once I have that form digest value, let me just clean this up here a little bit. Let's look at how it's being leveraged. So you can see here, I just removed, because I already had the get query parameter, I'm already getting my app web and host web, and I already have my ensure form digest value. Again, that code snippet is really handy for doing those three things because I do them in every single app I build that's a SharePoint app that uses Angular. So from there on, actually performing operations against SharePoint are quite easy. Remember in Plunker, we had a service called Get Artists. Well, here's Get Artists in our Angular service that actually uses SharePoint. The first thing I'm doing is, hey, if I've already gone out and got all of my artists from the service, then I'm not going to bother going out to SharePoint. I'm just going to return the artists. Otherwise, you can see here I'm calling the ensure form digest. So if this was my first time in, this is going to ensure that I go out and get the form digest value before I try to make a call. And in this case, a get, which is what I'm performing here, it actually doesn't need the form digest value. I'm just going out to my lists, getting the list by title, and then selecting title, genre, and rating. So that one's pretty simple. Let's go look at one that actually performs a post. So here's an add artist. So I'm doing an http.post, and I'm posting to the same list. I'm passing in the values from the new artist that I have. So artist.artist, artist.genre, artist.rating. But here's the key to make all this work is in my header, I'm passing that form digest value. Without that, it won't work. That's the whole reason we're going out and getting that form digest value. And if I go down to update artist, the same thing. I'm doing a post. The only difference here is my method is a merge because I'm doing an update, and you can see that I'm passing in that form digest value. So that form digest is really what brings this all together when I'm performing any sort of writing back to SharePoint. Getting data, easy. Writing data, I have to have that form digest value. And so that code snippet, I think, you'll really find handy. It automatically gets things like the app web URL, which you're going to need if you're performing REST operations. And then it's also going to have the form digest code to get that automatically for you. So that was a long journey that we just took together. We started from scratch. We just started building some things using Angular, with Bootstrap to make a good looking form website. Then we wired it up with Angular and made it much more dynamic with bindings and services that could share across controllers, and where we could have different views coming in and out of our single page. And then finally, wiring that up with SharePoint. So let's take a look at this app. Let me run it. And you can download this from my blog and that code snippet that will allow you to really quickly get the form digest value. So we'll simply come up here. We're installing it to SharePoint. You can see our progress down here at the bottom. And then once this loads, we'll be able to go and add artists all day long to our application. So it looks like it's installed. It's going to have us come log into our SharePoint site. Now, by default, I don't think I've ever had this app installed on this site, and so it's going to have no artist at first. So I'm going to actually have to go and add artists one by one in order for you to start seeing some of the data show up here. So we'll go ahead and let this load here a few more seconds. I'm also going to show you some of the magic of this being an actual SharePoint driven app. So we'll go in here. And while this is loading, one of the things I'll say is that really the only thing that I did between Plunker and Visual Studio was I took all of my script files and my views, and I just created file versions of those in my project, in my actual SharePoint project. So I came over here and I just created an app.js that had all my scripts. I separated things out a little bit. I like to separate my app from my controllers. So you will see a little bit of separation that I did in that. And then again, you already saw where I put my views. I have under pages, I had all of my dynamic views in here. So let's see, my artist catalog is finally starting to load. There we go. So here's my artist app. I'll go ahead and kind of minimize this here a little bit so it's kind of easier to see both things at once. And if I were to click add, it's going to bring me to my add form, and we'll just say, again, we'll add some of the same artist, group love. We'll give them a alternative with a rating of 4 and say okay. So now you can see, notice that the rating, I get this really nice looking star rating. That's using our directive, our element directive that we created. And we'll create a couple more here of the Beatles, and we'll call them rock. And we'll give them a 5. We'll add one more. We'll call this the Cure. And it looks like I don't have New Wave, but we'll call them Pop. And we'll give them a rating of a 3. And so you can see we have this really nice interactive form. In fact, if I go and I click on the Beatles, you can see that it brings me to the edit form. If I wanted to change anything, I can do that. Behind the scenes, this is all backed by a SharePoint list. You can see In this case, I use the normal container, so it's doing the resizing instead of being fluid. It's popping to different sizes until I get down low. But what I'll do is I can actually go to the list that is behind this. So if I go to my URL here and under the app, I go to the end, and I believe if I do lists/artists, I should be able to go to the actual SharePoint list that my app is backed by. So we'll go here really quickly to that. Seem to be having slow internet today for some reason. So we're not really seeing a traditional app web here because we've kind of taken over the entire user interface, right? We've driven everything as kind of our own UI. But here you can see this is the actual list behind the scenes. So you can see Group Love, Beetle, this is the Cure. In fact, if I wanted to, I could probably add a new item directly from this user interface. I won't in this case because I don't get the rating that way. But you know, again, this is what's backing that Bootstrap app that uses Angular. So I'll go back to that app, and actually, this will kind of be a cool way of viewing this as well. Let me go back to this list. It'll take a second for it to load the items. Just refresh it here. This Angular app, I'm actually never changing the page. Again, it's a single page application. What's being changed is this internal link at the end. So you can see I'm on the add view right now, this #/artist/add. That is that add view. And again, I apologize that for some reason the internet's really slow right now, but that's the only thing that's getting changed is this internal link. And the cool thing is because that's actually a part of the URL, I can just click back in the browser and I don't lose everything that I've done, even though I'm never leaving one page. It's just going back one internal link, and all the Angular routing handles that for me automatically. So I'm not sure why this is being so slow. So okay, so here's our items, and again, if you look at the end of the URL, even though I removed this, it added it back because this was our default, our otherwise that we listed in our route. So if I were to click add now, what you'll see is it just changed that internal path. If I were to click back, it allows me to click back in my browser. I've never changed the page. I'm still on this index ASPX page. All I'm doing is, again, adding a internal link to the end of this. So it makes it really nice for me to never lose my space, my place, and the Angular routing does all that for me. So I'll just add, maybe one more here. Foster the people. We'll give them alternative and a rating of maybe 4. Say okay, and there you go. There you have it. There's our Angular app that we started from scratch in Plunker. And again, we built basically the entire thing in Plunker up until the point where we needed to connect it to SharePoint. And then we took all of those files from Plunker. So we took all these files that we had in our Plunker, like the view-detail, view-list, put those into an app for SharePoint project that also had some lists created for genre and artist, and basically just made the modifications in our service. So the only thing we really did was make modifications in the service so that it called into SharePoint using REST. And again, just as a recap, the one kind of tricky part there is we needed to make sure we had that form digest value because we weren't using SharePoint's master page. So that was a lot to cover, but hopefully starting from scratch and slowly building it up to have more and more functionality, hopefully you were able to see how these can come together using both Bootstrap and Angular. You can certainly download this artist catalog project from my blog and my code snippet that adds some of the plumbing that I mentioned I end up putting in all of my apps like this. So the getting parameters from the URL and going and getting that form digest value. So thanks a lot for watching, and good luck building your apps with Bootstrap and Angular.